Imagine a man so rich that when he traveled, entire cities were thrown into chaos. Gold lost its value, markets collapsed, and historians centuries later still struggled to measure his wealth. Imagine a king whose generosity was so overwhelming that it changed economies, whose name echoed from West Africa to the Middle East, and whose legacy reshaped education, religion, and trade across a continent. This is not a myth or exaggeration. This is the true story of Mansa Musa, the richest man in history. A ruler whose wealth was beyond counting, and whose influence still lives on today. Long before banks, billionaires, or modern nations existed, the Mali Empire rose in West Africa as one of the greatest civilizations the world had ever seen. At its heart was gold, salt, and trade, and at the center of it all stood Mansa Musa. Born around the year 1280, Musa grew up in a royal family, though he was not born directly in line for the throne. In Mali, kings ruled with the title Mansa, and leadership was built not only on blood, but also on wisdom, faith, and strength. Musa was educated from a young age, learning about governance, Islam, trade, and history, preparing him quietly for a future no one yet imagined. Mansa Musa became king in an unusual way. The previous ruler of Mali, Abu Bakr II, was obsessed with discovering what lay beyond the Atlantic Ocean. Believing there was land across the sea, he organized a massive expedition and sailed west, never to return. Before leaving, he appointed Musa as his deputy. When Abu Bakr disappeared, Musa officially became Mansa of Mali in 1312. Overnight, Musa inherited one of the largest and richest empires in the world. The Mali Empire stretched across vast lands that today include Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, and parts of Nigeria. It controlled major trade routes across the Sahara Desert, linking West Africa to North Africa and the Middle East. Mali was rich in gold, producing nearly half of the world's supply at the time, and also controlled salt mines, which were just as valuable as gold. Under Musa's rule, this wealth was carefully organized, taxed, and protected, making Mali unimaginably prosperous. Unlike many rulers who ruled with fear alone, Mansa Musa ruled with order, faith, and generosity. He was a devout Muslim and believed strongly in justice and charity. He built mosques, supported scholars, and encouraged learning. But the world truly came to know Mansa Musa during one event that changed history forever: his pilgrimage to Mecca. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out on the Hajj, the holy pilgrimage every Muslim hopes to make at least once in their lifetime. But Musa did not travel like an ordinary pilgrim. His journey became the most legendary display of wealth the world has ever seen. He traveled with a massive caravan, said to include around 60,000 people, including soldiers, officials, servants, and slaves. Hundreds of camels carried gold, each loaded with hundreds of pounds of it. Everywhere Musa went, gold followed. As the caravan crossed the Sahara Desert, it looked like a moving city. People watched in disbelief as Musa's entourage passed through towns and kingdoms. When he reached Cairo, the capital of Egypt and one of the richest cities in the world at the time, history was forever changed. Musa gave away gold freely to the poor, merchants, scholars, and officials. He donated so much gold that the value of gold dropped sharply. Prices rose, economies were damaged, and it took years for Cairo to recover. This was not a legend, but a recorded economic event. People could not believe what they were seeing. Stories of Mansa Musa spread across the Islamic world and into Europe. Scholars, traders, and rulers spoke of the African king whose wealth seemed endless. Maps drawn decades later showed Musa seated on a throne holding a golden nugget, symbolizing the riches of Mali. Europe, which had long underestimated Africa, suddenly saw it as a land of power and wealth. But Mansa Musa was not simply throwing gold away without thought. In places where he gave too much, he later tried to fix the damage by borrowing gold back, one of the earliest recorded attempts to stabilize an economy. This showed that Musa was not only generous, but also aware of responsibility, even if the scale of his wealth made balance difficult. After completing his pilgrimage and returning home, Mansa Musa focused on transforming Mali into a center of learning and culture. He brought back scholars, architects, and books from Egypt and the Middle East. One of his greatest achievements was the development of Timbuktu. Under Musa's rule, Timbuktu became one of the most important cities in the world, known for education, trade, and religion. The Sankore University in Timbuktu became a center of knowledge where thousands of students studied subjects like mathematics, astronomy, law, medicine, and theology. Libraries filled with handwritten manuscripts flourished, many of which still exist today. Education was not limited to royalty. Knowledge was respected and rewarded, and scholars were among the most honored people in the empire. Mansa Musa also transformed architecture in West Africa. He built grand mosques using local materials and brought foreign architectural styles into Mali. The Jingareber Mosque in Timbuktu, still standing today, was one of his projects. These buildings were not only places of worship, but symbols of Mali's power, stability, and faith. Despite his wealth, Mansa Musa lived with discipline. He ruled with strict laws and strong administration. Trade routes were protected by soldiers, ensuring safety for merchants traveling across dangerous deserts. Justice was enforced, and corruption was not tolerated. Travelers wrote that in Mali, people could walk freely without fear of theft, something rare in the medieval world. Mansa Musa's wealth came not only from gold, but from control. The Mali Empire regulated gold production carefully. Gold nuggets were reserved for the king, while gold dust was used for trade. This control prevented inflation and kept Mali's economy strong. Taxes on trade routes brought in steady income, making the empire stable for years. While Europe struggled with poverty, disease, and war, Mali thrived. Yet Mansa Musa did not seek to conquer the world through violence. His power came from trade, culture, and influence. He connected Africa to the global economy long before modern globalization existed. As years passed, Mansa Musa continued to rule with wisdom. He balanced faith with leadership and generosity with discipline. He expanded Mali's borders slightly, but focused more on strengthening what he already controlled. His reign marked the peak of the Mali Empire. Mansa Musa died around 1337. Though the exact date is unclear, his death marked the beginning of a slow decline for Mali. His successors lacked his wisdom and discipline. Over time, trade routes shifted, internal conflicts grew, and rival empires rose. Yet even as Mali weakened, Mansa Musa's legend only grew stronger. Historians today still debate how rich Mansa Musa truly was. Modern estimates attempt to translate his wealth into today's currency, but most agree it is impossible to calculate. His riches came from controlling resources, trade, land, and labor on a scale no modern billionaire could match. He did not simply have money. He owned the system that created it. But Mansa Musa's true legacy is not just wealth. It is knowledge, culture, and connection. He showed the world that Africa was not a land of darkness, but of civilization, learning, and power. He placed West Africa on the global map and changed how the world saw the continent. Even today, his story challenges modern ideas of success. Mansa Musa did not chase fame, yet the world chased his story. He did not hoard wealth, yet became the richest man ever. He used his power to build schools, mosques, and cities, not monuments to himself alone. When people speak of the richest man in history, they often think of numbers, billions, or companies. But Mansa Musa's wealth cannot be measured in numbers alone. It was measured in influence, generosity, and lasting impact. Centuries later, his name still shines brighter than gold. Mansa Musa, King of Mali, ruler of riches beyond imagination, proved that true greatness is not only about how much you have, but how deeply you change the world. After Mansa Musa's death, the drums of celebration in Mali slowly faded, but the echo of his reign did not disappear. The empire he left behind was still vast, wealthy, and respected, yet it now faced a difficult truth. No one else could quite fill the space he had occupied. Mansa Musa had not only ruled with gold, but with vision, discipline, and a deep sense of purpose. Without him, Mali remained rich, but it was no longer unstoppable. His son, Magan the Way, inherited the throne, but he lacked his father's strength and wisdom. The empire continued to function. Trade still flowed across the Sahara, and the cities Mansa Musa built continued to shine. Yet cracks slowly began to appear. Powerful governors in distant regions began to act more independently, and rival kingdoms watched closely, waiting for Mali to weaken. Still, the world did not forget Mansa Musa. Long after his death, travelers from North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe continued to speak of him with wonder. They told stories of a king so rich that his generosity shook entire economies. A ruler whose gold seemed endless, and whose power came not from fear alone, but from respect. To many outside Africa, Mansa Musa became the symbol of a land they barely understood but deeply admired. Timbuktu, one of Mansa Musa's greatest achievements, continued to grow. The mosques he built still stood tall, and the libraries he supported expanded with thousands of handwritten books. Scholars from across the Islamic world traveled there to study law, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and history. For many years after his death, Timbuktu remained one of the greatest centers of learning in the world, a place where knowledge was valued as highly as gold. Trade routes that Mansa Musa protected continued to carry salt, gold, ivory, and ideas across Africa. Merchants still used the systems he strengthened, and his influence could be felt in how Mali governed its lands and treated its people. His rule had shown that African empires were not only powerful, but organized, educated, and deeply connected to the wider world. However, time is powerful, even stronger than gold. As generations passed, Mali faced new challenges. Internal conflicts weakened unity, and external enemies grew bolder. Other empires began to rise, and trade routes slowly shifted. The wealth that once seemed endless became harder to control, and Mali's dominance began to fade. Yet even as the empire declined, Mansa Musa's legend only grew stronger. European mapmakers drew him holding a golden orb on their maps, showing him as the richest ruler on earth. Long before many Europeans knew anything about Africa, they knew his name. He became proof that greatness had always existed on the continent, even if history books later tried to forget it. Centuries later, historians would attempt to calculate his wealth, comparing it to modern billionaires and kings. They all reached the same conclusion. Mansa Musa's riches were so vast that they could not be measured. His wealth was not just in gold, but in land, people, trade, knowledge, and influence. No ruler before or after him could truly compare. But perhaps Mansa Musa's greatest achievement was not his money. It was how he used it. He invested in education, religion, infrastructure, and unity. He connected Mali to the wider world while preserving its identity. He ruled with strength, but also with generosity and faith. In a world where power often destroys, he used power to build. Today, Mansa Musa's name still shines across time. He stands as a reminder that Africa has always been a land of kings, scholars, builders, and visionaries. His story challenges the idea that greatness belongs to only one part of the world. It reminds us that history is larger, richer, and more complex than we are often taught. And so, even though Mansa Musa's life ended, his influence never did. His gold may have been spent, his empire may have faded, but his legacy remains untouched by time. He was more than the richest man in history. He was a builder of worlds, a guardian of knowledge, and a symbol of what is possible when wealth is guided by wisdom. Long after the caravans stopped and the palaces turned to dust, one truth remains clear. Mansa Musa did not just possess unimaginable riches. He changed how the world saw Africa forever. And that is a legacy no amount of gold could ever buy.